Hey there! If you love exploring Christian philosophy and theology, you're in the right place. The video's about to get started, but first, I want to ask you a question. Do you find the content I produce on this channel valuable? If so, here are some ways you can help promote it. The first is completely free. Give this video a like, comment, and subscribe to the channel. Second, consider doing a one-time donation, kind of like a tip. You can do this in the form of a super chat or super thanks below. Third, consider becoming a patron. Patrons get early access to videos, they get to be a part of a patron-only Facebook group we call TAC Academy, and patrons can participate in the book club that meets on Zoom once a month. The link to become a patron is in the description. Thanks to all my current patrons for your support. Enjoy the interview.
Is there any good reason to be an open theist? My guest, who is an expert on the topic of God's omniscience and divine foreknowledge, thinks the answer is no. Welcome, I'm Jordan, and this is The Analytic Christian, the channel that helps you explore Christian philosophy and theology. My guest is Dr. David Hunt, Emeritus Professor of Philosophy at Whittier College. Hello, Dr. Hunt.
Hello, Jordan.
Dr. Hunt has been on once before to discuss simple foreknowledge and whether or not simple foreknowledge gives God any providential control. So you can go check that video out after you watch this one. But we're going to spend this interview talking about open theism. At the beginning, I just want to define some terms and make sure we understand what we mean by open theism, and then we'll go into a critique of it. All right, let's begin with, I think it's a simple question, but it may not be so simple. What is open theism?
First of all, it's an offshoot of Arminianism. So like other Arminians, open theists hold that at least some of the future is not predetermined. That is, it's contingent, to use the favored term of philosophers. And most importantly, open theists hold that the contingent future includes at least some human actions. And the reason they hold that is that they operate with a libertarian understanding of free will, and under which it's incompatible with predetermination. And they hold that at least some human actions exhibit free will. So those actions are going to belong to the contingent part of the future. Now, so far, that's this is straight Arminianism, right? No disagreements with other Arminians. But where open theists depart from their fellow Arminians is in denying that God knows this contingent future. So the God of open theism definitely knows less than the God of classical theism. Open theists sometimes call the view that they endorse dynamic omniscience. And on dynamic omniscience, the content of God's knowledge grows over time. Open theists can disagree on a number of issues. For example, on the reasons why God doesn't know the contingent future. And I know we're going to get into that a little later, but they're united in holding that God doesn't know it.
Yeah. And united in that God's knowledge grows over time. Yeah. Okay. So let's contrast that with the classical view. What's the classical view of God's omniscience?
Well, classical theists, just like open theists, can disagree on a whole lot among themselves. For example, does God know what he knows from within time or from outside time, like Boethius held? Or how does God know the future? Does he know it by, for example, through exhaustive knowledge of his own intentions? That would be an explanation that's available to a Calvinist, for example, but not to an Arminian. But whatever these disagreements among classical theists on those two questions and other questions about omniscience, they all agree that God knows the entire future, including any future contingents. just as he knows the entire past and present. So his knowledge is exhaustive of past, present, and future.
Mm-hmm. This may be a silly question to ask. I didn't give this one to you in advance, but as you spoke, it came to mind. Would a proponent of, well, somebody that isn't an open theist, might they still say God still gains knowledge over time? For example, maybe he knows what the time is right now. So he knows
Mm-hmm.
it's where I'm at, it's 8:20 p.m. now. And he didn't know
Right.
that a minute ago. Now
Yeah,
it's
yeah.
so would even somebody that agrees with like simple foreknowledge or these other views, somebody that is an open theist, would they still say God still his knowledge grows over time?
Yeah, I mean, particularly if you're a classical theist who holds that God is in time. Um, if you hold a Boethian view of God, then it's going to be a little different there. But for example, one thing that God knew, if I'm right, an hour ago, is that you and I would be talking on your show right now. God doesn't know that anymore. He now has a new piece of knowledge, namely that we are talking on your show. I gather that's the kind of growing in knowledge that you have in mind. Now you might think that that's, as I think, that's not a terribly important increase in knowledge
Mm-hmm.
compared with the sense in which open theists hold that God's knowledge grows over time.
Mm-hmm. Okay, that was a helpful overview of the contrast between open theism and the classical view. Now, like you said, it seems like the openest God knows less. So, what are 3 ways that open theists have tried to respond to that charge?
Yeah. Well, one open theist, Greg Boyd, has actually turned the charge around, arguing that the openist God actually knows more than the classical theist God, because the openist God knows all the possible futures. And I'm just not sure what to make of that effort to turn the tables, because of course, as I understand, the classical theist God knows all the possible futures as well. But he knows in addition which one of them is going to be actual. But most open theists allow that they're going to accept the charge. They allow that the open theist God does know less than the classical theist God. What they're going to want to argue is that this does not detract in any way from the openist God's qualifications as God. Right.
Mm-hmm.
And as you mentioned, there's 3 ways that they try to do this.
Yeah, let's
Yeah,
talk about each one. You've put together this slide that is really helpful at distinguishing these 3 views.
yeah. So I mean the first one, and the one that maybe we'll focus on later in the discussion, um, rests on the idea that there aren't any future contingent truths at all. Um, and you'll see on the chart there the names of a few proponents of this type. There's a lot of them. I think this is the predominant position that openness take. So to illustrate their position, suppose I say I'm going to have a BLT sandwich for lunch tomorrow. Since this assertion is about the contingent future, that is, the future could still go either way when it comes to my having or not having a BLT sandwich for lunch tomorrow. Its truth is as yet unsettled, right? So the assertion might become true tomorrow. That's one way to look at it. When and if I have a BLT sandwich for lunch, but it isn't yet true. So that's the position, right?
Mm-hmm.
Now, most philosophical participants in the debate agree that truth is some kind of correspondence with reality. And the reality of my eating a BLT sandwich, this is how the view would go, supposing that's what I do, doesn't arrive until tomorrow, right? And hence, since truth is a correspondence with reality, its truth doesn't arrive until tomorrow. Since there's no truths about what is still future and contingent, there's no truths there for God to know, right? So the open theist God does know less than the classical theist God, but he's still omniscient. There's just fewer truths to be known. Namely, there aren't any of these, supposed future contingent truths. So
Okay.
that's one line to take. Yeah.
All right. So I've done an interview with Patrick Todd, which is one of the individuals he listed there as a proponent of type 1. So for the viewers that are interested in hearing the development of an argument for why all future, well, Patrick Todd argues that not just that there's not truths of future contingents, but he argues that they're all false.
Yeah.
So the viewer can go check that interview out if you're interested in hearing more. So that's going to be something that an open theist of the first type is going to say, that there are no future contingent truths. And because there are none, God can't know them. So God doesn't know them.
Right.
But they want to say that God is omniscient because it's no mark against his omniscience that he can't know something that is impossible to know.
Yeah. That's going to be proponents of type 2, right? So a lot of us are concerned with the idea that there aren't any future contingent truths. I mean, just reporting, this is a psychological report, maybe for me, that there are future contingent truths seems to me about as clear a datum as there is. The interesting things about when you spend some time in philosophy is finding that just the opposite of something that seems to you to be as clear a datum as possible seems to be as clear a possible a datum for somebody, a fellow philosopher, and how he would make progress on these clear intuitions when they oppose each other is difficult. But a number of open theists do share my view, and the view of many, I think a majority of philosophers, that there are future contingent truths. So how is it that God could lack knowledge of them? Well, maybe a genuinely future contingent truth is one that is logically unknowable. And just as we don't require that divine omnipotence be able to encompass what is logically undoable, we shouldn't require that God's knowledge encompass what is logically unknowable. Why is it logically unknowable? Well, knowledge is more than true belief. There has to be something to, raise a true belief to the status of knowledge. And if there aren't any present conditions predetermining how things will turn out tomorrow, it's unclear what is presently available to raise that true belief to knowledge. In fact, it's even tougher for God, because human beings can have fallible knowledge. I can know something. I can have good grounds for thinking that something's going to happen tomorrow, that my neighbor's going to mow his lawn, because he always does on Fridays or whatever. So I can have a true belief that has good warrant behind it, to the point where we might want to say that I knew that he was going to mow his lawn. Maybe he also told me he was going to. Yeah, I'm going to mow my lawn again tomorrow, as I always do, right? The thing is that God needs more assurance than that to know the future, because God cannot be mistaken. I will sometimes be mistaken about my neighbor mowing his lawn tomorrow. There's a possible future in which I'm mistaken, but God has to be guarded against any possible, future in which things turn out differently than He foreknows it's going to turn out. So any evidence, current evidence God has to bolster His true beliefs to the level of knowledge has to be a guarantee. And the thing is, if we're talking about future contingents, there are no present guarantees for them. So knowledge of future contingents is logically unavailable to God. So that's the view of these the proponents of what I call the second type.
Do you think it is a mark against God's omniscience that if there are these future contingent truths and yet He doesn't know them, you think that does count against His omniscience?
I do, because I'm operating here with a straightforward account of omniscience as knowing all truths. And clearly, if you're a type 2 open theist, you hold that God doesn't know all truths. Most type, maybe all. I know this of Hasker anyway. He doesn't want to be saddled with the charge that his God isn't omniscient. So he reconceives omniscience differently. To be omniscient for Hasker is for God to know all truths that it's logically possible to know. And if you reconceive omniscience that way, then a type 2 open theist does hold that God is omniscient. But I operate with a straightforward view that to be omniscient is to know all truths.
Okay. And type 3 would say, yes, there are future contingent truths. Yes, God can know them, but no, God does not. So why, you said Willard takes this view, but why would somebody say that God does not know the future contingent truths even though He can?
Yeah. Well. First of all, there's reasons not to be a type 1 open theist, and we'll get into some of those later. There's reasons not to be a type 2 open theist. So, is there any logical space in which you can, still be an open theist? Well, if the mark of an open theist is that God doesn't know the contingent future, there's one ground still available, namely that God freely chooses not to know truths that He's capable of knowing. And what would be His motive for doing that? Well, there's a famous argument to the effect that if God knows what you're going to do, before you're even born, then you're not free. When you perform those, you can't act otherwise than an infallibly omniscient being foreknew that you would act. So you're not free. So suppose you hold that being free in the way that libertarians understand it is a great good that God wants to have. He wants human beings to have that kind of freedom available to them. Then, though there are future contingent truths, and God is capable of knowing them, He has a motive for refraining from knowing them. So He has some control on this view over whether He accesses this power to know the contingent future, and He refrains from exercising it to achieve this good.
Okay.
I don't know if anyone has joined Dallas Willard in holding that view. It's the only name I have up there. But there, I thought it's another position that's worth, documenting.
Yeah. Okay, so those are the 3 types of open theism. And so we're about halfway through the interview. At this point, I want to try and shift to your critique of open theism. And you can note along the way when you think you're giving a reason that counts against a particular type here, or if it just strikes more generally.
Okay.
So let me shift to this screen. We're gonna talk about the scriptural reasons to reject open theism, reasons that have to do with church tradition, and then philosophical reasons. So I thought it would probably be good just to start with the scriptural reasons. What do you think are some of the scriptural reasons to reject open theism?
Yeah. Yeah, let me say first, just as an indication of how I approach all of these reasons, scriptural, traditional, and philosophical, that one of the priests at our Episcopal Church tells about a theology professor of hers in seminary who had a dream in which she appears. She's in the afterlife. She appears before the heavenly courts, sits in God's bosom, and because she was a theology professor in life, of course, she asks God, "So how much of it did I get right?" And God answers, smiling, "Not much." And I expect the same will happen to me as well. And I appreciate that you started off this interview with talking about how we need to exercise, approach these questions with in a charitable spirit. And we see as in a glass darkly, and I have a very keen sense of that. And all these reasons have reasons on the other side. And start with the scripture. I mean, there are scriptural passages that can be used as proof texts for exhaustive foreknowledge. There's the famous 139, when including passages like, "Even before a word is on my mouth, O Lord, you know it completely." And there's many, texts like that seem to strongly indicate that God knows all of the contingent future. But on the other hand, open theists, some of them think that the scriptures their strong suit, because there's all kinds of openist, friendly passages in which God expects something that doesn't in fact happen. He changes his mind. He expresses regret or frustration, and so on. So you've got this evidence and tension, and then the question is, how well can your side deal hermeneutically with the text on the other side? I'll just say I think it's I'll have an easier time dealing with the openist friendly text than they have dealing with mine, but they're going to think the opposite. So I don't know that it can be settled on the basis of scripture. I don't want to make much hay out of that. I think for me, maybe I think tradition points more unequivocally in favor of my classical theist position. And that arguably puts the burden on the opposing views. Many, open theists look for, early, proto, openist figures in the history of the church, and it's a difficult task. It is an innovation. Now, that doesn't mean it's wrong, but it's an innovation. And so I think it bears the burden of proof. If you're a real hardline sola scriptura Protestant, you might not attach much weight to tradition. I'm not. I'm a small C Catholic, a mere Christian like C.S. Lewis, and I actually care a lot about the tradition. I think it's a little intellectually arrogant not to care about it. And openness will, there's no doubt that the tradition was influenced by pagan philosophy, in particular Neoplatonism. You can't read Augustine's Confessions, for example, without realizing that. And openness will often claim that the tradition was corrupted by pagan philosophy. Whether it amounts to corruption, of course, depends on whether it was a beneficent influence or a bad influence. I tend to think, as a Neoplatonist myself, I tend to think that it was a beneficent influence. But yeah, I mean, what we're going to want to talk about more is the philosophical arguments, because if a knowledge of future contingent truths is simply, conceptually unavailable, then it doesn't matter what the tradition says, and that's going to certainly have to determine which scriptures you're going to use to interpret other scriptures. Some open theists cite the problem of evil as a reason for being an openness. That the problem of evil is easier under open theism. The less God knows about the contingent future, the less we can hold him responsible for how things turn out. And John Sanders, one of the leading open theists, actually, tells a story about his brother killed in a motorcycle accident, and how he was not comforted at all by other Christians telling him, "Oh, maybe this is part of God's plan," and so on and so forth, and that starting to see God through an openist glasses actually left him, was more consoling to him. Or you can, take I think of the death of my nephew, who was born with cancer, with a tumor already invading his body, and lived for 1 year. My question, though, about how this helps with the problem of evil is, look, deny God knowledge of future contingents. Did God really not have enough time during that year that my nephew was dying to save him? He must have had some reason for not doing that. The motorcycle accident with Sanders' brother happened much more quickly, but still, God had a few seconds available in which he saw this is going to a bad place, to intervene and stop that from happening. So in both cases, God had some reason for not intervening. And it just seems to me, and nobody, has, I haven't heard any completely good satisfying account of what that reason is. The problem of evil really is the toughest problem that Christian theists face. But whatever the answer to that question, is just not clear why that would be available to the open theist and not available to the classical theist. So I don't find the problem of evil favors openism much at all. So let's focus on
the philosophical arguments.
God's knowledge.
Well, before you do that,
yeah, sure.
In the chapter, you go through several scriptures. I don't want you to go through all of them, but it might be helpful to have maybe one example, and then we can shift to some of the other philosophical reasons, because you already mentioned briefly the church tradition, so we won't spend much time on that. But maybe if you can recall, maybe just one text that an open theist might say, this seems to favor pretty strongly like an openist view, and then maybe just explain how you might interpret that text differently.
Yeah, sure. So Greg Boyd, in his contribution to the Four Views book on divine foreknowledge that I also participated in, cites a text. You're putting me on the spot here, Jordan. I think it's from Jeremiah, in which God expected grapes, but instead wild grapes. were what the vine produced. Yeah, so as an open theist, you might say, well, look, if God foreknew that wild grapes would come from that vine, that seems to be inconsistent with his expecting grapes, non-wild grapes. Right? One way you could handle that is to, what is it to expect something? When you expect things to go one way, does that always mean that that's how you believe they'll go? No, and there may be something in the original Hebrew that would settle this question. But when I tell my students, I expect you not to plagiarize, does that mean that I believe that no one will plagiarize? The expectation claim is laying out a standard, and I may, in fact, believe, based on some of the students I have in that class, that someone is probably going to plagiarize, but I still expect that they won't. So I don't know how good an alternative interpretation of that wild grapes passage that is. But of course, open theists are going to have to come up with plausible interpretations of Christ's prediction that Peter will deny him 3 times, and so on and so forth. We're all going to have trouble.
Yeah,
we're all going to engage in what the other side will regard as strained exegesis in order to account for the passages that cause us trouble.
Okay, I thought it might be helpful just to have one text in mind to see how an open theist would interpret it and how someone that isn't an open theist might interpret it. Okay, let's shift back then to the philosophical arguments. And you already mentioned the problem of evil. It seems like that's not, as you, at least you're trying to argue, it doesn't look like the problem of evil is going to favor open theism over other views. So we can set that one aside. What other philosophical arguments do you want to consider here?
Well, with a limited time, which of course we have, why don't we focus on the type 1 open theists and their claim that there aren't any future contingent truths. And I know you have another slide that you can put up here that's it's hard to read because there's so much information on it, but I think it might nevertheless be useful.
Yeah, I'll mention this to the viewer.
Yeah.
So I have put a link to this the picture you're seeing in the description of the video. So if you want to click on that, then you can zoom in and see everything much more clearly. You can pause the video and look, but it was just hard to fit all this into one slide. I tried my best, but it's actually, if you really look at it, it is communicating something really, really clearly. Dr. Hunt put this slide together, so I thought this is great. We want to keep it just like it is. But yeah, pause the video and look at it for yourself slowly, and then resume, and I think it'll make a whole lot of sense.
Okay, so you may barely be able to make out around the middle of the slide. It's in bold. I am eating a BLT sandwich, and that's at 1 p.m. today. Okay, so suppose that I do that at 1 p.m. today. I eat a BLT sandwich. And it's because I'm eating a BLT sandwich that while I'm eating it, the present tense assertion, I am eating a BLT sandwich, is true. Right. So you've got that proposition has available to it a correspondence in reality. I am eating a BLT sandwich, and it corresponds to what's actually happening in reality. Now, what about the proposition yesterday that I will eat a BLT sandwich tomorrow? Now, according to openists, that proposition can't be true yet, because there's nothing corresponding to it. There's nothing in reality yesterday when the proposition is being uttered that makes it true. Now, what is available yesterday is certain preliminaries to my eating a BLT sandwich today. But none of those makes it true, can count as a truth maker for the future tense assertion that I will eat a BLT sandwich tomorrow. For example, now I'm going to have to, actually, I have this a little bit larger here in front of me, and I can look at what's on the chart. Yesterday, I get up, and at a certain point, getting close to lunchtime, I wonder what I should do about lunch. I introspect and I find that I'm craving a BLT sandwich. So these are some of the things that are happening yesterday. I don't feel like going out. That's just the way I feel. I find that I don't have any tomatoes in the refrigerator, so that rules out making a BLT sandwich. I end up making myself a peanut butter and honey sandwich for lunch. Okay. Later in the afternoon, a friend with whom I had a luncheon date the next day at Panda Express, which does not serve BLT sandwiches,
Right.
calls to cancel our luncheon date for the next day. So you see, things are developing. They're leading up toward the possibility of my having a BLT sandwich the next day, right? Next day I get up, I decide this is a good day for a BLT sandwich. Okay, we're on today now, right? So guided by that passion, I find my wallet, begin looking for my car keys. I find them under a cushion. I drive to my favorite sandwich shop. There's still nothing in place that causally determines that I'm going to have a BLT sandwich. In fact, when I show up at the sandwich shop, I see that pastrami and rye is on special. That's an option, but I still order a BLT. And now we're up to the present, 1 o'clock today. I'm eating a BLT sandwich. So there's nothing yesterday. There's nothing really much before 1 o'clock that predetermines that I'm going to be eating a BLT sandwich today. Yesterday was a future contingent that I would be doing it, and there were no truth makers for it yesterday. Now, according to the openness, then it wasn't yet true yesterday that I will eat a BLT sandwich tomorrow. That only becomes true when 1 p.m. today arrives. Tomorrow, I ate a BLT sandwich yesterday. What about that claim? Well, there's various, causal residues of what I did at 1 p.m. today. Bacon is continuing to pass through my large intestine at 2 a.m. tomorrow, right? At 10 a.m., I recall the lovely and delicious BLT sandwich I had the day before. I can do that only because I ate one the day before, right? So we're here in the causal aftermath of my having eaten this BLT sandwich. The cat later discovers a sandwich wrapper smeared with avocado and tomato in the kitchen garbage bin. Okay, so now you know everything that's up on that chart. I just read through all of it. Now, my view is that there are future contingent truths. And indeed, given that at 1 o'clock today, I eat a BLT sandwich, I hold that it was true yesterday that I will eat a BLT sandwich tomorrow. On what grounds? Because that was a future tense statement. What makes a future tense statement true? It's about the future, right? It can't be rendered true by my eating a BLT sandwich today. It's rendered true because it's about the future by what happens tomorrow. my eating a BLT sandwich today at 1 p.m. is, and here you can follow the 3 arrows at the top, it renders a present tense statement true, a future tense statement true, and a past tense statement true. It's because of my eating a BLT sandwich at 1 p.m. today that all the following are true. That's what provides the truth makers for all the following. I am eating a BLT sandwich, uttered today. I will eat a BLT sandwich tomorrow, uttered yesterday. I ate a BLT sandwich yesterday, uttered tomorrow. Now, suppose somebody says, I mean, there's going to be all kinds of objections. This is just my view, right? Suppose someone says, look, how can it yet be true yesterday that I'll be eating a BLT sandwich tomorrow? That's still future and it's contingent. You aren't eating a BLT sandwich now. Well, consider how we handle the past tense statement tomorrow. I ate a BLT sandwich yesterday. That doesn't have a truth maker in anything that's happening tomorrow. What makes that true is something that happened the day before. You wouldn't say it's no longer true that I ate a BLT sandwich yesterday. Right?
Right. Yeah, I'm with you.
Okay. So why would you say yesterday it's not yet true that I will eat a BLT sandwich tomorrow? I'm treating the past and the future symmetrically here. The truth makers for these statements are they're all about what I do at 1 p.m. today. The truth makers for those statements all have to do with what happened at 1 p.m. today. They don't have anything to do with what happened yesterday or what's going to happen tomorrow. So that's the alternative view that I take.
That makes sense to me because I guess the way I'm thinking of it, you're talking about eating a BLT sandwich, but it's just any action at a certain time. So like action A at time T. That's going to be, it seems like on your view, that's going to be the truth maker for statements about action A at T, whether those statements have a future tense or whether those statements have a past tense. As long as those statements are about action A at T, that happening, then they've got a truth maker.
Yeah, that's right. That's right. I'm inclined to think that when openness and others make the charge that future tense statements about future contingents aren't yet true, that they're confusing evidence makers with truth makers. There's no current evidence makers that require that I eat a BLT sandwich tomorrow. But there's the truth maker for that statement is you're going to find that tomorrow at 1 p.m. because that's what the statement is about. Likewise, when it comes to past tense statements about my sandwich eating tomorrow, there are causal consequences of my having eaten that BLT sandwich, but even those aren't truth makers for my having eaten a BLT sandwich. They're simply evidence makers. They're residual causal evidence. Because imagine that God miraculously tamps out any causal traces of my having eaten that BLT sandwich yesterday. those alleged truth makers now are all gone. You're left with nothing but the real truth maker for that statement that I ate a BLT sandwich yesterday, namely my eating that BLT sandwich yesterday.
Right.
There's nothing available tomorrow to ground the truth of that statement. But surely, if your position on future contingent truths requires that you abandon all truths about the past, um, that's a reductio ad absurdum of the view that there's no future contingent truths.
Okay, so that rules out type 1 open theism. It seems like, yeah, this could be, I don't know how you're thinking of the argument exactly, but it seems like if there are no, it might go something like this. Premise 1 might be, if there are no future contingent truths, then there are no past contingent truths, but there are past contingent truths, so there are future contingent truths. And it's like you're drawing a kind of symmetry between the past and the future.
Yeah, and one way you can challenge and should challenge that symmetry is to say that, of course, when we're talking about the past has already happened, and so it's to use a term of art, it's now accidentally necessary. It's locked in a way that the future isn't. And open theists are going to say that there's also true statements about the future, at least that part of the future that is causally settled already. This leads to another issue I'd like to raise before we move on to other aspects of the problem. It seems to me that if the critique of a future contingent truth succeeds, then we have a whole tense in a natural language that has no purpose, the future tense. Now, open theists will say, oh, wait a second, the future tense can still be used to talk about the non-contingent future. But I'm not sure if there's any non-contingent future left. Let me give an example. Today, Abraham Lincoln is still dead, right? We can conclude that tomorrow Abraham Lincoln will still be dead. Okay, so there's a statement about the non-contingent future that I can make, and that is licensed by this, is still available given this attack on future contingent truth. Namely, I say Abraham Lincoln will still be dead tomorrow. And you could say the truth maker for that is the fact that he is dead today, right? And it's causally determined given those present conditions, it'll be dead tomorrow. But now consider Lazarus in the tomb. He's dead, right? And his being dead provides the same causal conditions as Abraham Lincoln's being dead, that he's going to be dead tomorrow, right? But Jesus comes along and raises him from the dead. So much for those truth conditions for your claim about the future. No, the truth conditions for claims about the future, whether they're claims about the contingent future or the non-contingent future, concern only what happens in the future, tomorrow. There may be pretty strong evidence available today that something will be true in the future, but God can always miraculously overturn any of those causal conditions and their consequences. So it seems to me that the only future statements about the future that you can rely on as an open theist are statements like 2 + 2 will still equal 4 tomorrow, or tomorrow there still won't be any married bachelors, right? And that leaves the future tense with pretty much nothing to do. And I think that's a pretty big cost.
Okay. All right, I think we said a fair bit about an argument against type 1 open theism. What else would you like to add? Or do you want to shift to arguments against type 2 and type 3? Or
Yeah, I don't want to take time saying much about type 2 or type 3. Maybe just this much, very very briefly. Type 2. There are future contingent truths, and God can't know them. This is God, and so I think the burden is always on the person arguing that God can't do something, and so I would need a pretty convincing argument that God can't know the future, and in particular, the justification that's often given is that for the contingent future, there isn't sufficient currently available conditions from which you can deduce that the future will go that way rather than another way. Well, on my view, at least I think it's a possible view, God knows the future by directly apprehending it. So it's irrelevant what present conditions are available to raise God's true belief, possibly true belief about the future to knowledge. I would like to see a knockdown argument that God can't know the future by directly apprehending it. And regarding type 3, Willard's view, or the view of anyone who's tempted toward type 3 openism, is based on the famous argument that if God foreknows what you're going to do, even before you're born, you don't have any alternatives available to you. You can't act otherwise. Your action can't exhibit libertarian free agency. And that's an argument I think is a bad argument, where that would be a subject for a whole other show. So that's what I have to say in brief about type 2 and type 3 open theism.
Okay. Well, we're getting very close to the end, but before we wrap up, I wanted to get your thoughts on Dr. Alan Rhoda's argument for open theism that he offered on my channel. So I interviewed him several months ago, and I wanted you to comment on his argument. It was near the end of his argument that I kind of lost. It was difficult for me to understand how he was making the step that he was making. I'm still not sure that I understand that final step he was making. So maybe talking to you can help me see.
Yeah, well, unfortunately, you have the slides, the very useful slides from his presentation, and there's a couple that might be helpful. So put up the first of those.
So this was the first slide that I asked Dr. Rhoda, what is open theism? And this is what he said.
Yeah. So you could try to settle this just by an appeal to scripture, but I've already told you why I think it's a bad idea. The famous or infamous Psalm 139, verse 16, says this: "In your book were written all the days that were formed for me, when none of them as yet existed." And that would seem the most straightforward interpretation of it, that for must be false. But scripture is tricky. Again, there are openist friendly passages that I would have to deal with. So let's see if we can understand what the argument is here. One, theism just characterizes what all of us theists have in common. Two, future contingency, that distinguishes Arminians, fellow Arminians, from other classical theists. So I'm on board with two as well. It's the argument for four that I would have to find some problem with, or convert to open theism. And 3 is the key premise in the argument. It's impossible for the future to be epistemically settled in any respect in which it is causally open. So if you have a causally contingent future, the claim is that that future can't be epistemically settled. I know that in Allen's original article, I think he couched this incompatibility claim in terms of what was alethically settled, that is, in terms of its truth being settled, that the contingent future is incompatible with there being a settled truth about that future. So I'm not sure what the significance is of shifting to epistemically settled, but certainly if something isn't alethically settled, it can't be epistemically settled. So the question is, what's the argument for 3 and then for 4? So there's one more slide.
Yeah, before I do that,
yeah,
just the viewer may not have yet seen Dr. Rhoda's interview, so I'll just mention this. Not only, so when I asked Dr. Rhoda, what is open theism? The open theist would hold each of these positions, but the way that Dr. Rhoda presents it, 4 is the conclusion of 1, 2, and 3.
right.
So the only way to avoid 4 would be to deny at least one of those first 3 premises. Yeah. And Dr. Hunt just made clear he accepts 1, he accepts 2. So then, unless he's going to become an open theist, he has to deny 3. And so now we shift to Dr. Rhoda's defense of 3. What did Dr. Rhoda have to say in defense of 3?
Yeah, remembering the story of the theologian sitting in God's lap. Who knows? Maybe I'll become an open theist, but not yet. Maybe I'll find that it's true when I get to heaven. Yeah. So why think that there can't be a settled truth about that's then knowable at any rate by God when it comes to the contingent future? Well, we have some reasons here. Each resolution, and I'm looking down at the bottom half of this, each resolution of a future contingency adds new information. Okay. So that seems right. Future contingencies chain into one another. What choices are available now depends on what choices were made earlier, and that certainly seems right. And then consequently, so this is the conclusion that is supposed to follow from these points, the story of creation has to be built up sequentially over time. It cannot exist in completed form from the moment of creation. So I think that gives you, that's supposed to give you step 4 from the previous slide. And I guess my reaction is that I'm not sure how this is supposed to follow. I think the argument is maybe less clear than I like, and I wonder if there is some equivocation on the notion of a story here. There's the events that a story is about, and then there's the story that tells about those events. And that's where I think there might be some equivocation. It's the events, what happens, that produces new information as the events unfold, that chain into one another and build up sequentially over time. But I'm not sure how one gets from that to there not being any complete, infallibly known story about those events, which exists in completed form from the moment of creation. And maybe we can go back to my second slide,
Yeah.
the one overloaded with information. Um, if you look at this, you see that there is we have new information unfolding as you go from left to right. Um, I wonder what I'm going to do about lunch. Lunchtime is coming along. I get information about what's in the refrigerator. I find out what I feel like eating. That's new information that I hadn't thought about earlier. I get new information about my friend's availability for lunch tomorrow, and that's what frees up my maybe being able to have a BLT sandwich for lunch tomorrow. So new information is coming along as events unfold. They chain into one another. So some of these events are what make possible other events later in the sequence, and they build up sequentially over time. So all of that is packed into my chart there. New information unfolding, events chaining into each other, building up sequentially over time. But all of that is consistent, at least according to the chart here, with it having been true yesterday that I will eat a BLT sandwich tomorrow. So what I'm not getting here is how it is that the events beneath the timeline there, the relationship between them and how they are splayed out sequentially over time entails that the story, that is the set of true propositions, a set of true propositions yesterday about what I would do, why that isn't available. What makes it true is what happens today, right? So that's the disconnect for me. Seems that everything that Alan says about events chaining into one another, occurring sequentially over time, someone who holds that they're future contingent truths agrees with that. I don't think that the future is anything but future. The future isn't here yet. Events occur sequentially over time. But my view is that a future tense statement uttered yesterday about today is rendered true by what it's about, namely my eating a BLT sandwich today at 1 p.m.
Yeah, you expressed really well, I think, what I was thinking, but during the interview with Dr. Rhoda, but I wasn't expressing well. So this chart summarizes it really nicely. Yeah, I'll go back to his slide. He was making the point, he's calling it non-open free will theists, like, for example, the simple foreknowledge view. They say these future contingents, the truth of them comes from the actual occurrence of those events. And that I'm on board with, right? We're both saying, yeah, the truth of those happens because of the actual occurrence of those events. But I guess, again, it's the point about you don't have to wait until those events happen for there to be a truth about them. It's just if I express a statement about those events and that statement's in future tense, like I will eat a BLT sandwich tomorrow, as long as I really do eat a BLT sandwich tomorrow, it's true. I don't. That just seems really clear to me. Yeah, so I don't know what else to say about that. Did you want to say anything else about Dr. Rhoda's argument?
No, I think there's a lot more to be said, and I would need to read his article again very carefully, or watch your program with him. But just putting it in the simplest terms, that's where I'm losing the connection between the argument and the conclusion. Yeah.
All right. Well, thank you very much for joining me. Before we go, I don't know if this is possible because we said a lot, but if you could, in 60 seconds, how might you say you were on an elevator ride and somebody said, "So why aren't you an open theist? You only got 60 seconds with them." What do you say?
I'd say that I'm a small C Catholic. I find that I care a lot about the tradition, and maybe that's just an autobiographical comment about me. I grew up in a group, the Plymouth Brethren, that didn't care about tradition at all, and I felt myself starved for communion with the larger, community of believers over time. And that consensus over time is that God has exhaustive foreknowledge, and so my default, my bent is always to see how far one can go in defending the deposit of faith that has been handed down to me. And I'm just not convinced by the main reasons that openists offer. Scriptural reasons, that cuts two ways. The tradition, I think, breaks strongly in favor or against open theism, and the philosophical arguments that they use to back up their dissent from the tradition aren't convincing to me. That's it.
Yeah, you stated that really succinctly. Thank you. All right. Well, I've really enjoyed getting to talk with you again, Dr. Hunt, and I'll mention to the viewer one more time, please go check out my other interview with Dr. Hunt, where he defends simple foreknowledge as giving God providential control. It really does. Simple foreknowledge really does help God in terms of divine providence.
Not as much as Molinism, but a little bit.
Yeah. Thank you for watching, and keep exploring Christianity.